Superheroes. You either love or hate the genre, but whether or not you like it or dislike it, the genre has been on a downward spiral in terms of quality. A lot of people are starting to get tired of the superhero genre, me included. But what exactly does this show have to do with the downfall of superhero movies and superhero media in general? Because once companies realized that people were kinda getting tired of the same shtick, they invented superhero parody media. Now, I'm aware that this type of media has been around for a while now, ever since superheroes existed, but this type of media only became popular semi-recently. And with media such as The Boys and Deadpool, audience saw it as a breath of fresh air. And since DC had become pretty much the laughingstock of the comic book industry, they decided to make a show that poked fun of themselves. And so they made Harley Quinn, an animated dark comedy superhero show where the main character was, you guessed it, Harley Quinn. And while the first season had its problems, I still liked the first season. It was fun, kind of charming, and some of the jokes were funny as well. And when the second season came out, I liked it less, but I still thought it was just okay. And now that the third season has come out, I wasn't exactly excited, but I was interested in where they were going to take this new season of the show. And now that I've watched the whole thing, I'm gonna lay out my criticisms and problems with the show on why it's a bad season of television. And before anyone accuses me of being sexist or homophobic for not liking this season, I can't believe I have to spell this out, but I don't care if your main character is male or female, gay or straight, or anything like that. I just care if the show is well written, and while I will be criticizing Holly's relationship in this show for being inconsistently written, that does not mean I think the writing is bad because they are both in a lesbian relationship. Now that we've cleared that out, let's get on to why I think this show is bad. Spoilers, by the way, if you haven't seen the entire show yet, since I'm probably going to be spoiling all of it. I think that one of my main complaints about this season is its comedy. Now obviously, there's a reason why it's really fucking hard to criticize comedy. It's because no matter what joke you make, it'll always make someone laugh. But I feel like I have enough proof to show why the comedy is ruining the show. This critique will be split up into 3 parts. Why the comedy is not funny, how it ruins the structure and pacing of the show, and how it ruins the characters. Let's talk about why the comedy isn't funny first. The comedy in the show reminds me of Family Guy, but instead of focusing a weird family going on weird adventures, it focuses on weird villains doing crimes and other wacky stuff. Is it as bad as Family Guy humor? Nope. Is it still really fucking obnoxious and in your face? Yes. The best way I can describe the humor for this season is random XD humor. Just throwing out things that literally make no sense, and since it makes no sense and it's unexpected, it's funny. For example, during season 1, during the Eat Bang Kill tour, Harley kidnaps Queen Elizabeth II for no reason. Yes, I know, quite literally impossible now, haha, but remember, this was a couple months ago. It is never explained how Harley had the time to do this, nor did they properly justify why she was here other than just cause. There are multiple times throughout the series where this just happens, like in episode 4 where Harley and Ivy invade the Court of Owls headquarters, and then the members in the court all of a sudden start having a random orgy. Sometimes the jokes are not subtle at all and can be taken at face value, like what if the Mad Hatter was a weirdo, but a self-aware one, and they joke about him being a pervert? Or Jim Gordon, but instead of him being a good cop, what if he was narcissistic and corrupt? They once made a joke about him where he had to choose between his daughter and the campaign for him becoming mayor, and predictably, to no one's surprise, he chooses the campaign over his daughter. Although, in the end, he chooses his daughter over the campaign. However, I thought this arc had been finished in season 2, where Jim finally learned that he had to be a good cop for himself and his daughter, but apparently they just recycle the same plotline again in season 3. This happens quite a bit in Harley Quinn, where they sometimes recycle plot lines. It's very infrequent, but when it does happen, it's very noticeable. My final example is dedicated to Nora Freeze. Her whole character is that she's a drug-addicted alcoholic who likes to fuck. That's the joke. Not only that, but half the episode is spent on her character arc. But more on that later. You can find these jokes funny, of course, but these jokes are very lazily written with almost no thought or intelligence behind it. It's very on the nose, and it starts to become very obnoxious when you see that it's not even funny, and it's just annoying. I'm not saying that none of the jokes aren't funny, because there were definitely some jokes that got a laugh out of me.
Right, it's Joe Cool.
No, that's Joe Chill. Joe Cool is when Snoopy wears those, sunglasses and pretends to be a college student.
I thought Joe Cool was the camel that sold cigarettes to children.
No, that's Joe Camel, and he doesn't...
Great, we missed it. Now they're dead. Too busy arguing about fucking Snoopy. Were his parents murdered? I'm not quite getting it. Could you show us 1,000 more fucking times?
Okay, I think we got the shot. Time to lose our tail. It's been real, Your Majesty. Later!
Harley, no!
Yeah, she's got an invisible parachute.
I am gonna choose not to question that.
That one didn't age quite so well.
Even though some of the jokes did make me laugh, it doesn't mean that the comedy is good. I could listen to every single jazz song in existence, and just because I like 3 out of the millions out there, it does not mean I like jazz. So just because there were a few jokes I laughed at, doesn't mean the ratio of jokes I laughed at outweighs the jokes I didn't laugh at. Now let's move on to why the comedy ruins the structure and pacing of this show. It is obvious from a writing perspective that by the very first episode you are supposed to establish the plot for the rest of the season. I explained this in my Euphoria video. You need to have a plot to structure your season on. So what is the plot for season 3? Well, it mostly focuses on Harley and Ivy's relationship and how great it is. But it also shows that there's a strain on their relationship already, 2 weeks after they started dating, and they are already having some pretty big issues with each other, but more on that later. The main driving force for the plot this season is Ivy wanting to be able to control her Eden project, so she can spread it all over Gotham to make it into a beautiful place. That's the plot for this season. So since we've established that plot, we are now going to focus on Harley and Ivy working on the Eden project, right? Right? No, the plot just focuses on Eden for a while, but conveniently something contrived always comes up to halt Ivy's progress. And most of the time, the reason the plot is being stopped is for comedy. We get these huge fucking filler episodes where Harley and Ivy fuck around and do nothing. To prove my point, there's a scene in episode 4 where Ivy wants to work, but Harley keeps on being an asshole and distracts her. This scene is supposed to be played off for laughs, but is not funny at all. Instead of the comedy working together with the plot, the comedy immediately tries to halt the plot for something that's not even funny. But then Frank gets kidnapped a while later in the episode, and the kidnappers conveniently leave a clue for Harley and Ivy to find them. So now we can't get back to the main plot, because now there's another main plot being shoved in about Frank being missing. So now the plot is being halted even further, because we need to find Frank. I get that this is a comedy show, but even in Harley Quinn, the comedy used to always work with the plot. Season 1 was Harley wanting to prove to everyone she was no longer Joker's pet, and she could be a good villain on her own. Season 2 was about Harley trying to take over Gotham, which halfway through gets replaced with a romance plot. Throughout the season, there's always been a plot at some point, and maybe a filler episode along the way, but here there's about 80% filler and 20% plot. It makes the season more jarring to binge through, since you have to go through all the filler to get to the stuff that's actually good. There are a lot of good ideas that the writers could have done with the Eden Project plotline thingy, but instead of focusing on it, they shoved it all out of the way to focus on the comedy. What makes the structure even worse is that characters will be introduced for comedy's sake, never to be seen again. Sometimes plot lines will be introduced and then will never really be focused on again. For example, in episode 1, Amanda Waller gets introduced. Harley Quinn fucks with her and Waller destroys Eden, which makes you think that either Amanda is going to take down Harley and Ivy, or the opposite will happen where Ivy and Harley will go after Waller. But she's never mentioned again. In fact, she's never seen again either. The plot just ignores it like nothing happened. So in conclusion of this part, the comedy part of this season often rudely interrupts the flow of other sections of the show in favor of trying to get some cheap laughs. Which brings me to my third and final point on why I hate the comedy, and that's how it ruins the characters. So let me explain what I mean by this, because there are a lot of addendums to write about how this show's comedy ruins the characters. First, there's the characters all of a sudden being nerfed or buffed. Sometimes they'll gain abilities out of nowhere, sometimes the plot just does shit out of nowhere and the show makes a joke on its inconsistent writing, and then moves on. Secondly, there will be times where side characters are randomly shoehorned into the plot in order for their arcs to be complete, even though they never need an episode dedicated to their arc anyway. Last but not least, there will be main characters and how they will be affected by the shitty comedy. So let's talk about the first one. There will be times in the show where the writers will back themselves up against a corner, and instead of smartly writing themselves out of that situation, they will start writing contrived nonsense, and then acknowledge how lazy it is, expecting the lazy writing to be excused. That's not how writing works. If you write something contrived and you acknowledge it's lazy writing and you still do nothing about it, that's even worse than being ignorant about it. A contrivance is a contrivance, lazy writing is lazy writing. I don't care how many self-aware jokes you write, that does not excuse your writing from being lazy and fundamentally flawed. I'll give you a couple of examples to show what I mean. In episode 5, Ivy explains something that will be used to find Frank called the Green. This seemingly overpowered superpower of hers has never once been mentioned throughout the entire show, and has never been used either. Even though if she had used the Green, she could have helped wrap up a lot of plot points in previous seasons. Instead of the writers trying to justify this blatant plot hole they managed to create out of thin air, they instead make the excuse that she didn't know how to use the Green, but does explain she does know who to find to help, that being Swamp Thing. She also mentions that she used to be friends with Swamp Thing, which causes another blatant inconsistency, since why didn't Swamp Thing tell her in the first place while being friends? If it was as simple as simply believing in yourself, then you would think that she would already know this, right? And yes, this is only one of the examples I'm giving me. Trust me, there are plenty more, like how convenient is it for the zombies to throw up and make Eden happen for Ivy. These types of things have happened before, and are usually hush-hushed away by the writers, because they want you to not focus on that, and instead just look at all their awful jokes. This brings me to the second part of how the comedy ruins the characters. That being side characters having their arcs that never need to be completed in the first place. I think the best example I can give for this is Nora Freeze's arc. She is an alcoholic, drug-addicted mess, and yet for some reason, the show thought we needed a conclusion for her character. Even though we never really cared about her character, so her being here feels randomly shoehorned in. She stops being a mess all because she hooks up with Swamp Thing. Yes, you heard me, the wife to Victor Freeze who died in front of her hooks up with a swamp monster, and then everything gets better. Everything about Nora in the show feels like a disservice to her character, and more importantly, a disservice to Victor's character, since you really feel bad for him, and you start empathizing why he does what he does. Then it turns out his wife was a piece of shit anyway, so why should I empathize with Freeze if her wife is a terrible person? Another episode that unnecessarily focuses on another character is the Joker. We get a whole episode dedicated to him and his life, when again it was never really needed in the first place. However, I will let this episode off the hook a tiny bit, mostly because it puts to bed the Jim Gordon subplot. The Joker episode is admittedly pretty funny.
Superman! Dad, we're saved!
Oh no, it's just Gordon. Keep screaming, son.
The whole premise of Joker becoming a good person who cares for his family and also runs for mayor gives me White Knight vibes, and the whole idea of Joker being this normal father who runs for mayor is probably one of the funniest ideas this show has ever explored, so I will give it credit there. My final example will be with King Shark and his underwater adventure. This is a waste of time, and services nothing to the plot, nor its characters. It's this whole plot about whether or not they should give over their land to Black Manta, and it's just so fucking dumb. And it's just such a worthless plotline that you can skip, and you probably wouldn't even know the difference. And just when you think King Shark's character might be going somewhere, nope, he's still the same character as he usually is, which makes me wonder why the fuck it even focused on this plotline. Same thing for the Nightwing plotline, which went on for longer than it should have. Which brings me to my final point, how the main characters get fucked over. Now I've already talked about how Ivy and Harley's plotline gets fucked over, with Harley being a plot device to fill out the season, and how Ivy's character gets fucked over with her arc constantly being halted in order for random bullshit to occur. I've also briefly talked about King Shark's plotline, so let's talk about Clayface's plotline this season, that being his dream for being in a movie. At first, the show mildly focuses on his character and where it's going, but then just kind of gives up, and then briefly mentions in passing dialogue what he's doing, and that his arc is going fine. Fucking big whoop. I don't think that there's any main characters I need to talk about, since I believe I've covered all of Harley's crew at the moment. I mean, there's that old guy, but he's only around for a few seconds this season, so that doesn't really count. So that brings me to my comedy argument to a close. Sorry it was 20 minutes too long, but I had a lot to rant about there, so let's move on to another big criticism I have with the show, that being the animation. This season has dipped in animation quality, and it really fucking shows. Season 1 had this amazing fight scene at the end of the episode, and was pretty consistently well animated for the rest of the season. Season 2 dipped a tiny bit in animation quality, but was still pretty great. This season is just, holy fuck, what fucking happened? I caught some pretty lazy fucking animation cuts. They were all pretty noticeable. For one, the fight scenes have dipped in quality tremendously. For what used to be a show that could animate 5-minute non-stop action scenes, has now resorted to maybe 30 seconds at most. Once they even resorted to stills as replacement for a fight scene. And it was so obvious they didn't feel like animating a fight scene, so they just put some stills in. In episode 7 we see King Shark's brother, and his brother is the exact same model as King Shark, except a different shade of color for his skin. To make sure you can't tell them apart, they both wear different clothing and are both the exact same. Tell me right now these two sharks aren't exactly the same. There are more examples I could give, but I think you get the point. The animation has severely downgraded. Not only on a technical level, but presentation-wise, it feels rushed and unfinished. It feels like it needed a couple more months in the oven, because this does tell me that these animes are unmotivated. This tells me that they have either rushed the process, or the company didn't give them enough time to finish, or your animators love cutting corners. And since it's estimated that your 4th season is coming out by next year, I would heavily suggest that you give these animators more time to finish the show, otherwise it's going to be more rushed than it ever has been. This brings me to one of my main complaints about the show, and one I'm sure you've been desperately wanting me to criticize for this video, and that complaint being about the relationship between Harley Quinn and Ivy. Holy fuck, this is going to take a long time to explain, and yes, I'm aware that the show has covered how bad their relationship is in the season finale. However, instead of them covering the points I'm going to talk about, they only covered one of the many problems I have with their relationship. So yes, while Harley doing almost anything for Ivy was a red flag I briefly mentioned, it is still not very satisfying because all the problems I will mention have almost nothing to do with Harley's desire to not go through with the Eden plan. She was quite on board and never intentionally tried to sabotage Ivy's plan until she found out that innocent people were getting hurt. So don't give me this bullshit that she was causing problems in the relationship because she was trying to sabotage Eden all along. And even if that were the case, they shouldn't be together then, just because of how dysfunctional their relationship is. Ivy says that she'll support Harley in whatever she does, but again, that was in context of her trying to become a hero, so now that I have contextualized everything for you, let's go back to why this relationship is bad, and even in the end of the season, they should not be together like the writers are trying to make you think they should be. So, let me explain. This is probably the worst way to continue a character's relationship I've ever seen. What in the fuck were the writers thinking when they wrote this? The relationship between Harley and Ivy has been pretty straightforward. In the first season, they were just friends, while Harley had some confused feelings for her later on in that season. Season 2 made Harley mad in love with Ivy, and at the end of the season, they get together. Now, where does Season 3 end up? Well, Season 3 starts off 2 weeks after their relationship. Okay, that sounds like a pretty decent way to start off. No problems here so far. And already, their relationship has problems, oh for fuck's sake. Their first problem in the relationship is how vastly different personality-wise Ivy and Harley are. Harley is a crazy girl who does crazy shit, and Ivy is more calm and collected as a person. Now, this is fine, you can be in a relationship with someone who is different from you. Hence the saying, two opposites attract. However, what isn't normal is getting sick of hanging around your partner already after 2 weeks. Harley has had no problem communicating with Ivy in the past about her feelings, but here she isn't. Now, I know that this season explores that a bit, but again, context matters. She'll support Harley in whatever she chooses to do, but that was when Harley was debating about whether to be a villain or hero. Same goes for Ivy. She has had no problem either communicating what she wants, except for a couple times, but those situations were probably some of the most extreme circumstances I've ever seen, so I understand her being confused. She even communicates things pretty fucking well in the season finale, so there should be no problem with her communicating to Harley, right? Right? So while Ivy measures the fucking pH level of everything, Harley gets really bored, till finally something happens and Harley pretty much is responsible for Eden getting destroyed. Not completely responsible, but actually she is responsible. She led Amanda to her, so one may even saying. Which means this whole mess would have never happened if Harley hadn't have fucked with Waller. We also see in episode 2, Harley being annoying to Ivy, and Ivy needing some serious alone time by herself, which is fine, whatever. Maybe if you really want me to believe that they're happy, then fine, we'll give this scene a pass. But then episode 3 happens, and that's where I started to think that maybe these two aren't right for each other. Because Harley wants to go to this awards ceremony, Ivy doesn't want to go, but goes anyway for Harley, which makes me wonder why the fuck are you two even together if you can barely get along with each other for a single episode, without one of the two of you just doing something to fuck with the other person, or just lie to them to make them happy. This is a toxic relationship. They are barely into their first month of their relationship, and already they have so many fucking problems. If you are having problems like these in the first month of dating someone, then please dump them. The thing that I question the most about this is why they wrote the relationship to have massive problems by the first episode. That has got to be one of the most bizarre writing choices I've ever seen. If you really want to explore the problems in their relationship, then don't do it in the very first episode. It just makes it look like that Harley and Ivy aren't meant to be together for each other. Instead, subtly show them by having tiny problems with each other for the first couple of episodes, then naturally ramp it up. Remember, the writers are trying to make us believe that they're meant to be together. They spent 2 seasons trying to make it work, and instead of building upon that development, they knock it down, like the previous 2 seasons didn't happen. And after season 3 is finished, I still think they aren't meant to be together. They just have too many fucking problems with each other for me to even count. I think one of the worst cases of this has to be in episode 4, where Ivy needs to work on her Eden project for her to find out which serum works. However, Harley is being fucking annoying. She is loud, obnoxious, and just annoying to watch. Instead of Ivy politely telling Harley to keep the noise down, or Harley to go somewhere else since she's trying to work, she instead makes up this really weird lie about how Catwoman doesn't want her doing it, even though that all could have been avoided by politely telling Harley to keep it down. If you're worried that your partner will get pissy over you telling them to keep the noise down while they are working, then you should definitely not be with them, or at least consider it. I don't need to be a relationship expert to tell you that this is an unhealthy relationship. And of course, the list goes on, showing how bad Harley and Ivy are for each other. And it's not like the show is aware of this, it is completely oblivious to this fact sometimes. The only time they are fundamentally aware of this fact is at the season finale, where they are like, oh shit, we actually need consequences and, you know, repercussions for actions, and we need to make the arc come full circle.
I guess I should talk about my least favorite.
And my favorite episode of the season. My least favorite would have to be by far, It's a Swamp Thing. This episode is pretty much everything I hate about Harley Quinn in one episode. The first half of this episode is literally just filler of people partying and then conveniently Nora finds Swamp Thing. After more time being wasted, Swamp Thing lashes out and then proceeds to blame Ivy for being so self-centered, which is an interesting moral. Ivy taking accountability for Swamp Thing as a person to put all of her personal weight on. But instead of that, Ivy proceeds to not listen, and then talk about her own problems instead of acknowledging Swamp Thing's problems. And then he lets her go. Wow, fucking incredible writing there. And the cherry on top of the absolute shit sandwich of this episode, that being the power to the green was inside of her all along. The writers then joke about how lazy it is for being that way, which still doesn't let you get away with it. It still makes you just as bad for acknowledging it, and not changing a single thing. We also get Nora this episode, who is awful, so yeah, this is by far the worst episode of Harley Quinn I've ever watched. The best episode this season has to be Batman Begins Forever. It is a great episode exploring Bruce's trauma and what motivates him to do what he does. It's a great episode. My only complaints of the episode being that Harley has so much plot armor this episode, it's insane, and how the reveal of who shot his parents kind of felt a bit predictable, but they also kind of waste a bit of time in the middle of the episode, since I thought, why couldn't they just take Bruce and leave, and then a few minutes later that's what Harley immediately does. It was kind of annoying to view since it's basically common sense too after thinking of nothing else. But I digress. Anyway, that's about all I've wanted to talk about when it comes to Harley Quinn Season 3. While I do have a few more complaints, I want to mention only the major problems this season had instead of literally every single thing that sucked about this season. So in conclusion, Harley Quinn Season 3 was pretty disappointing for me, and while this season did have its highs, the lows were too many to count. The only thing I can hope for is that Season 4 is better. I feel like Season 4 should be the final season of the show, since it does feel like they're kind of spinning its wheels at this point, and I really just want to see this show end before they milk it completely dry. So thank you so much for watching. If you disagree with my complaints, please comment down below on why. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. And I'm going to give Harley Quinn Season 3 a 3 out of 10. Bit ironic, I know, but whatever. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you guys for my next video. Bye.